Merry Christmas, beer geeks, and welcome to the second episode of the Craft Beer Channel Christmas Content 2021. The nights are drawing in. I definitely should have started filming earlier. And maybe there's the smell of log fires, of Christmas cake baking, of pigs in blankets in the oven, and you, if you're anything like me, are also off your tits on strong Christmas beer. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this week's episode. There's no Brad, because we are going deep into the snow, deep into the snowy weeds of Christmas ale, looking at the history, the origins, what is Christmas beer, and indeed, what isn't Christmas beer. So you're probably a bit confused by the three beers that are next to me. We've got a pastry stout, Christmas. We've got probably what you think of when you think of a Christmas beer, which is a spiced Belgian ale. And then we've got a Scotch ale. And I'm going to be explaining why, in fact, this is perhaps both the most Christmassy and the least Christmassy of them all. But before we dig into that, there's two things you need to know. One is that all of the stories that I'm about to tell, and indeed loads more stories, are in my book. Is it on that side? Yeah, it's on that side. A Year in Beer, which is my new book that came out this year. And there's a whole chapter on Christmas beer, what to drink at Christmas. There's our Christmas homebrew, our mince pie double in there as well. And then lots and lots of the anecdotes and even more about the origins of Christmas beer and what makes it so wonderful is in that book. The other thing to note is that there is a wonderful blog about the history of Christmas ale. I'm going to put a link to that below, from which lots of my information came from and certainly loads of my inspiration. So please do check that out. I want to give credit to the people that do the hard work, and then I just, I drink and talk about it. So let's dig into Christmas ale. So the first thing to think about with Christmas ale, but even before we define it, is to remember the origins of beer itself. So obviously, beer was invented 6,000 years ago, probably by accident, by people who accidentally fermented some grain, just left it out in the sun while it was wet, ate a bit of it and went, wow, I feel significantly more confident about my life chances right now. So they enjoyed that. They called it a gift from God in many parts of the world, that feeling of elation and of relaxation that alcohol can give us. And partly because of that, but also because it was a great way to celebrate generally, alcohol became, and particularly beer, became associated with religious festivals. Now in Christianity, pretty much every feast day for centuries to come, millennia to come even, was celebrated with beer. And that's where we start the story of Christmas beer. So the earliest kind of reference I found to concrete beer, being brewed specifically for Christmas is 920 AD, when King Hakon of Norway insisted that all the farm owners in Norway brewed a beer for their farm workers. And that was because he was exiled to England for a decent proportion of his life, where he was converted to Christianity, and he came back and started enforcing those views onto the good people of Norway. Now, Norway obviously already had celebrations. They had Yule, which was kind of a feast day that celebrated the complete end of harvest. So everything had been picked, malted or stored or whatever. They'd have had the first hunts and they'd have lots of meat in. So it was kind of a celebration, perhaps around the solstice, so the shortest day of the year. So celebrating the fact that days were starting to get longer again. So they already had that, and all Hakon did was basically go, it's for Jesus now, and also you need to brew more. So that's kind of the first Christmas ale that, there's really good records of, but probably it had been going on for hundreds of years because beer was already invented, it was already being used as a celebratory drink, particularly in climates that didn't have wine. So Christmas beer has probably been a thing almost as long as Christianity itself. So we then have centuries of Christmas beers being brewed, specifically for the celebrations around that time of year. And obviously so much of brewing, particularly in Europe, happened around the monasteries. The monasteries were the people producing it. They were using it to fund their way of life, for good causes, for their own causes, for some slightly less good causes, I'm sure. But it was a way that they made money and sustained their life. And in fact, some of the more austere people, such as the Trappists, they would have, during fast days, been drinking beer at lunchtime. So they wouldn't have eaten when the sun was up, pretty much. And they'd have been drinking beer to sustain themselves. So beer had a really important part of the monastic life. And lots of the beers that they brewed for festivals would have made it out, the excess would have made it out to the public. So there again, we have loads of beer coming out at certain times, and all the farms would have been making them as well. But the monasteries were, you know, the big powerhouses of brewing. So after the breakup of the monasteries and the kind of the professionalisation of brewing, we had loads of breweries starting to open, and regional differences in all these breweries started to occur. And that's when we finally hit the 3 beers that we're going to be drinking through today. And up in Scotland, they were making what is now kind of known as a Scotch ale. So up there we had lower temperatures that the beer was fermenting at. We had their malts, any hops or spices or whatever they could get hold of to bitter it and to preserve it. And it kind of developed this kind of character that the Scotch ales actually have. So I'm going to get my Hermitas. These are all big beers, so I'm going to be needing this. And this is what we know as a Scotch ale now. So it's an amber or a brune, as the Belgians would call it. And what we're expecting is loads of caramel, sweetness, almost kind of a lagered lack of real character. Although, of course, this being a Belgian beer means that there will be probably some Belgian character. Toffee apples, sweetness, caramel, breadiness, like all these really kind of hearty, wintry, autumn kind of flavours are coming out from that. Now, around the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, Scotch ales were wildly popular in Belgium. The Scottish were exporting loads and loads of it over there, pretty much their best customers, because for some reason the Belgians loved these darker, really clean and sort of caramelly sweet beers. And the enterprising wholesalers, importers over in Belgium started thinking, if we can get the really special stuff, the stronger stuff, probably the stuff that was made using the freshest malts and hops from each year's harvest, so the October beers as they were known, the big strong stuff made with the good stuff. If they could bring those over for celebrations such as Christmas, they could charge more and indeed do a bit of marketing. So these wholesalers and retailers started referring to these Scotch ales as like Christmas Scotch ales. So better quality, bigger, special for Christmas. And so this started this kind of morphing of Scotch ales into Christmas beers over in Belgium. Big, dark, sweet, clean beers. Can you see where I'm going with this? So obviously we've now got Scotch ales being celebrated at Christmas, and you've got Belgian brewers wanting a piece of the action. So they'd start creating rival Scotch ales, not just at Christmas, but specifically at Christmas, but throughout the year, trying to make their own versions of these Scotch ales so that they can sell them for a big profit because they're so popular in Belgium. So now we come to one of my favourite beers in the world, and I mean half the reason that Brad's not here is so that I can drink all of this after we're filming. Let's be honest with ourselves. This is St Bernardus Christmas Ale. Now, St Bernardus is super famous. They make some of the best Belgian ales in the country. They also used to make the Westvleteren beers under contract until the 80s, so these are world-class brewers, and this beer is probably my favourite of the lot. So it's called Christmas Ale. I haven't got a Winky Monk. If you have a Winky Monk, it's a strange phrase. Apparently there's only one in every 10,000 wink, but I do not have one. It's not a Christmas miracle. So let's get this in the glass and see what kind of relation it bears to the beer that would have inspired it. So it's a very similar colour, isn't it? Very similar head, very similar look. And the smell is pretty similar. You've got that apple and that caramel that suggests toffee apple, but there's loads more of the apple. There's loads more sweetness. There's a definite hint of that like really nice heady kind of nail polish, which in small amounts, that acetaldehyde can be really beautiful and aromatic. And then lovely rich spiciness, pithiness as well, like an orange peel kind of thing. Now, are there spices in this? It's a great question. The Belgians are always kind of cagey about what they put into their beers, but if you go to the website, the flavours that they talk about here, zestiness, and then there's an image which has licorice, well, there's originals, I think cinnamon sticks, coffee, dried apricots, dates. So they're trying to imply to you that there might be some fruits or some spices in this. And I think that there probably will be to get that kind of aroma. And that is what Christmas Ale, in Belgium at the very least, has become. So they've taken this base, and maybe because these beers had, even now, this one had a much more muted kind of Belgian character, they started to introduce spices and zests as well. Rather than hype up that Belgian character, they've tried to add something new, which is, you know, what they did with the wit beer, with the coriander and the orange peel and stuff like that. So I think they've got sort of blended those two brewing worlds together and created, you know, a big, dark, perhaps wit-inspired kind of Christmas ale. but it's not specific to coriander, to orange, to any of the stuff that's in this photo on the website. I mean, there's Guden Carolus, which has licorice in it. It's way too much licorice for me. There's, I think, thyme and orange is used in the Schoof Christmas beer, but they're all playing around and trying to create really Christmassy aromas that, you know, maybe would have been buried if there was loads and loads of esters and phenols all kicking off and out of the glass. So I'm just going to have to take a sip because it smells so good. Now that they've suggested coffee to me, it is there. You don't often get that in a quad. You don't often get a lot of roastiness. But I think maybe with the elevated sweetness, the lower phenols, they've gone, we can add a little touch more roast to this. And, you know, there's a little hint of it there. It's such a complex beer. It's such a beautiful beer. I absolutely love it. But that is kind of my theory as to how Belgian beers evolved. Maybe they got a little bit bored. Maybe they wanted to add some seasonality to what they were brewing. Or maybe they looked at wit beers and went, this could really work in a much stronger Christmassy beer, and indeed work with the food and, you know, the history of Christingle with the oranges, stuff like that, starting to try and create Christmas in a glass rather than it being essentially a marketing ploy by some wholesalers bringing in some Scottish beer. So we've got these occasionally quite heavily spiced but still relatively balanced, big, bold, boozy, Scotch ale inspired, King Haakon inspired Christmas beers. And then, well, we kind of lose our minds to some extent. So craft beer, in its lovable way, has taken the traditions and stamped all over it in the name of big flavours. So what I have here is a beer from a brewery known for its adjunct brewing, known for its really big stouts, and a brewery that does them extremely well, and that's Brew York. They've been in Christmas videos with us before, but when I saw this one, I just couldn't say no. So this is Nightmare of Brew York, and it is a peanut, pecan, maple, and vanilla imperial milk stout. So, I mean, pecan's more kind of Thanksgiving. Maple, it's just winter generally. Peanut, I mean, we eat a lot of nuts on Christmas Day, at least I do. And then vanilla, I mean, I think taken individually, it's not that Christmassy, but when you put it all together, it just screams snacking on Christmas Day, and I'm well into that. Oh my God. Jesus. It's like peanut brittle on vanilla ice cream with caramel sauce. It smells like Starbucks at Christmas, actually, if I'm honest. Not that I often go into Starbucks anymore, but it takes me back to my teens when that was where you used to hang out if you couldn't get served. Whew! Peanuts. Not peanuts, but not peanut amounts, but lots of peanut. Goodness me. That, I mean, if somebody's allergic on my street, they're probably in trouble at this point. So these beers kind of embrace the kitschness of Christmas. Kitschmas, if you will. I can't think of a food match that would go with this at all. Maybe chocolate log is about the only thing, which is a slight issue, I think. Christmas beers should be great with food because all Christmas should be is drinking until the next meal. So yeah, it's a bastardization of this. I don't think that this was particularly traditional when it came out, so I'm not going to say that this is sort of departing from any kind of great tradition of Christmas ale, because I think, you know, I said, what even is Christmas ale as the thumbnail of this video. And I think that what it is a taste of Christmas. And Christmas means different things to different people. And before this turns into a Hallmark Christmas movie, what I mean by that is that there's lots of Christmas ales that you won't consider Christmas. There's lots of Christmas ales that I don't consider very Christmassy. But that's because I have a very different experience of Christmas to other people. And I think that all three of these are wonderful Christmas beers. I think that that's going to be brilliant with a roast turkey or with your roast ham. It would be absolutely amazing with if you're having ham. I think it would also be great with your evening turkey sandwiches. Cranberry sauce it'd be perfect with because of that sort of berry note. Same with this one, but this is born to go with mince pies, to go with rich stews, and any kind of really wintry food. And, you know, one thing that I love about Christmas is Christmas leftovers. So I buy a couple of these in and I'll be drinking them for the whole week of Christmas. And then this one is the pure silliness. This is what you drink while watching the silly Christmas movie that's on every single year. For me, probably Back to the Future 1, 2 and 3 and then 2 again because it's the best one. And that's the kind of beer that I'll be drinking, and that's a wonderful Christmassy thing too. It's kind of like they just picked up all of the quality streets and then just shoved it into a beer, and you've got to if not respect that, you've got to enjoy that, and I really, really do. So Christmas ale, you know, it may not have a definition. It may be that, you know, you could have a cranberry sour and try to call it Christmas. I'm not the arbiter of what Christmas is, but it has to make sense to you as a Christmas celebration, or to the people that brewed it. So even though it's not really a style, it's not really even a tradition at this point, it has a really rich history and has changed throughout history immeasurably from what King Haakon would have made. He wouldn't have made it, what somebody else would have made for him, to what the kings of pastry up at Brew York have done. So don't be judgy around Christmas ales. If ever there's any time to embrace the batter of pastry beer, then this is the time. So I wish you a very Merry Bradmas Christmas, and we'll see you for the homebrew next week.